Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kyle, and I'm on the Popular Marketing team, and I'll be hosting today's webinar, Recalibrating Comms to Achieve More in 2023. For those unfamiliar, with over 6,000 customers across 80 countries, Populo is the leading communications and workplace experience platform, revolutionizing how companies connect with their employees across email, digital signage, Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and more, all from a single platform. So before we do dive into the webinar, we have a couple housekeeping notes. We're currently on the Zoom platform. Please feel free to use the Q&A section to enter questions you may have throughout the conversation. We will save time at the end to get through as many as possible. And yes, we will be sending out a recording and slides to all attendees. Now on to our featured speakers. I'm excited to hear from two experts in the comms landscape, Chris Lee from Gallagher and Populo's very own Heather Bicknell. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Kyle. So my name is Chris. I'm Vice President of Employee Experience and Internal Communications at Gallagher, and I'm based out of Toronto here in Canada. And if you look behind me, it looks like there's a big storm brewing. As over the course of this webcast, you might see things start to turn white behind me, but I'm looking forward to this chat.
Great, and I'll just introduce myself as well. So my name is Heather Bicknell. I'm a product marketing director at Populo. Interestingly enough, I'm based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, so not too far. That storm will be coming my way shortly, but my focus is really on understanding the employee communications market and launching new products and features that are designed both to make communicators' lives easier and their jobs more effective. So really looking forward to diving into today's discussion. So on the agenda for today, really our focus is going to be sharing the results of the 2023 Gallagher State of the Sector report. We've decided to hone in on a few key areas because it is such a comprehensive and excellent resource. We needed to, focus on a subset today. So there are four key themes that we've pulled out from the report to focus on, really thinking about how communicators are using technology today and what they're finding success with. So those key themes are personalization, channel use, measurement, and tech satisfaction. And then we'll have some time at the end to answer all of your questions about this great piece of research. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to introduce this report.
Yeah, Heather, and I think I'll start by talking a little bit about Gallagher. Our organization, we've partnered with Populo now for years, and what Gallagher really is it's a global employee experience and internal communications agency. We've got something like 200 passionate professionals that are committed to creating work that feels great for our clients. And we do really everything from internal comms consulting, planning. We do channel audits, which Heather and I are going to talk about a little bit later in this webcast, to delivering game-changing creative. We work with some of the world's best-known brands, as well as some of the lesser-known brands. But the objective is always the same, which is to create memorable and impactful experiences within the workplace. And our creative team, our digital team, our video producers, they're all on the same page. And then we do everything as well, right down to the sometimes bewildering world of employee benefits, well-being, retirement communications. And so it's some of the kinds of work that we love doing the best is demystifying some of those. Now, then we're going to be talking a lot about the state of the sector, and that's a survey. So if we just go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what this is. And really, this is an industry-leading internal communication survey, which probably many of you joining this call are familiar with and have been devout readers of this survey. And we've been doing this now annually at Gallagher for 15 years now, and we reach 2,000 organizations worldwide with varying different industries, different organization sizes. So it's fairly representative of the types of clients that we tend to work with. And Heather and I, we're really hoping that you'll find our discussion really interesting. We're going to use the results to drive some of the discussion today. So Heather, let's just dive right into this. And before we get into some of the key themes that we were talking about, I thought I'd go into some of the heavy hitting questions. So one of the questions we talked about in State of the Sector, of course, is what is the purpose of internal communications? And one of the things that we find is that in this year, we found that culture and belonging and creating an inclusive workplace where everyone feels like they're really part of something bigger, and they get their energy from it has become really, really important, with 3/4 of organizations telling us that this is the main purpose of internal communications. And so Heather, why do you think that this has become so important to communicators, this idea of culture and belonging?
Yeah, I think this is really a fascinating finding from this year's survey, to see culture and belonging beat out strategic alignment as the core purpose of comms. I think it could really point to, the state of the workplace we find ourselves in, and sort of a convergence between priorities of HR teams and internal comms teams, which I think is super interesting, because one of the, there's a lot of great baselining findings in the report, and one of those is that only 22% of IC teams are reporting into HR. So it's not even just a result of reporting lines. It's really overall organizational goals. And I do think it's also interesting to note that the top two were actually flipped for large organizations. Strategic alignment still came out on top, but they were still very, very close. So I think it's really, we've seen over the past few years a growing disconnect between employees and employers. And I think really need to kind of bring everyone together, which could be why we're seeing this theme dominate this year.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more, Heather. I think, and I love what you're saying about that convergence of the role of internal communications and the role of HR. I mean, these are concentric circles with much heavier overlap than I think people understand and realize, which is, in so many organizations that we deal with, the programming and the HR initiatives are only as successful and as effective as the communications and the quality of the communications to deliver on desired outcomes. So I couldn't agree more, Heather. And I think throughout the State of the Sector, we're going to see that this is reflected in a lot of the responses and the insights. I think for us as internal communications professionals, it's incumbent on us to have a really good, strong understanding of the programs and some of the things that we're being asked to support with HR. So why don't we talk a little bit about the top priorities and just kind of making a pivot here. So one of the things that we found in the State of the Sector is that over half of the respondents, in fact, 51%, see the top priority for communications to be engaging teams around purpose, strategy, and values. And I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on this, Heather, as purpose has become really important, in particular over the past 3 years, as back-to-back Zoom calls have really become a big feature of what our modern workplace has started to really look like. And this has impacted organizations' abilities to continue to keep people engaged and to keep them connected to their purpose. What are your thoughts on that, Heather?
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think, it does go back to what we saw earlier around the purpose of IC. I think another interesting finding from the survey was that over half of organizations are revisiting their employee value proposition this year, which I think correlates really well with what we're seeing as the top priority. So in some ways, a lot of these findings in terms of the top priorities really speak to a need to get back to basics, focus on refreshing internal communication strategy and really rebuilding the functions. Maybe it's sort of a, as a sign of where we are again, that things have perhaps settled down and the need to be sort of always reacting to change, and that there is that need to look and reassess, are our teams engaged? Are we doing things in the correct way? And then another really interesting finding from the survey that I just wanted to call out is that really only a little over half of respondents feel that their employees understand their strategy, vision, and purpose. So it is almost surprising in that way to see this number not even higher, because it's obviously a key outcome from internal communication strategies.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important to keep in mind that from a communications perspective, the end state and the end goal is to change behaviors, to change attitudes. And so how do we get values for an organization to be much more than words that are a poster on a wall or that employees memorize from rote? So I think this is a partnership with HR to better understand what are the desired outcomes and what does this need to look like beyond the different ways that we can communicate it. What does the experience look like so that it does feel like it's reflective of an organization's values? So with the top priorities in mind, let's talk a little bit about the top challenges that we saw in State of the Sector. And one of the things that we see fairly often in the years that we've been doing this is that lack of time and capacity is always a top challenge, and we see that year over year. But I can't help but wonder how internal technology can actually play a role in helping, ease capacity concerns with less manual interventions on some of the communications. And if you look at these, the third and the fourth stats here on the slide here, we're talking about nearly a quarter of organizations are talking about a lack of analytics and metrics. And similarly, nearly a quarter are saying that internal technology and the channels that they're using are not necessarily fit for purpose. I'd love your thoughts on that piece, Heather.
Absolutely. When I look at these challenges, to me, they're very interrelated. I think the capacity and time that a team has, as well as the analytics tools at their disposal and internal tech, if you can't measure the results of your program, it's really hard to argue for more capacity, right? And if you're constantly fighting with your tools to be able to just do the basics of reaching your full workforce in an effective way, it's going to sap a lot of resources from your team in terms of needing to recreate content or sort of always reinventing the wheel, right? So yeah, it's not surprising to see these things interrelated, and it's sort of a bit of the chicken or the egg, right? It's can you argue to get the right tools in place to improve that time and capacity on your team, or you're kind of stuck in this reactive state?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Heather. An area that I think is something that we focus on as a theme in State of the Sector, and that is this year we're looking at the rise of the UX or the EX, as it were, for employees, and the rise of personalization and segmentation. And before we really jump into this, this is the audience participation segment of this. We'd love to hear about, at your organization, what are you doing to personalize internal communications today? And choose as many as are relevant in your organization. But we'd love to hear about what kinds of things that you're doing to personalize internal communications. So we'll give you a few seconds to read through and check the boxes that make the sense for your organization. And then Heather and I are looking forward to chatting a little bit about the results here. All right, so let's take a look and see what people have been responding with. All right, so it looks like the number one response, with 57% of people here on this webcast, is actually sending communications at specific stages of employees' lives. And then following up with second is addressing employees by their name. What are your thoughts on this, Heather? Does anything about this surprise you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see this in a second, but I think the attendees on today's webinar might be a little bit ahead, even of the more representative sample we saw in the survey. It is really interesting to me to see, 10 percentage points over sort of a more complex form of personalization, but arguably more valuable in terms of sending comms at the stage of the employee journey. That being so much more adopted than even the basics, what we think of maybe as the table stakes of addressing employees by their name. It's really interesting findings and how they differ just slightly from the overall survey results.
For sure. And let's take a look at what our colleagues in the state of the sector said, and it is largely the same. It is the top two responses were addressing employees by name and sending communications at specific stages of people's lives. I'm not overly surprised, but I liked what you said earlier, Heather, about addressing employees by name as being table stakes. I think it's 2023. I think we should, at the very minimum, be looking to address people by name, even if it's fairly obvious when you get a "Hi, Heather" type of email. But I think what's more interesting here is that when we think about what a consumer grade user experience looks like, I start to look at things like sending communications at specific stages of employees' lives. So it's really encouraging to see both within the state of the sector as well as in this call that this is something that organizations are doing. But more to the point, if you look a little bit further down this list, enabling employees to select the channels that they prefer to use and to select what types of content that they receive. I think this is where the opportunity is for a lot of organizations to really personalize internal communication.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it looks like, there is a lot of recognition that it would be extremely valuable. So maybe it's more on the technology side that folks just don't have the right tools at their disposal to make that happen. I did think these results were interesting in contrast to a survey that Populo ran last year, where we sort of looked at what's the employee view of personalization, because we can, myself as a marketer, I have my own view, internal comms professionals have their own view of what makes personalization valuable, but how is it really perceived by that employee or end user, right? So what we found was actually that over half of employees surveyed said that if their employer just did, the basic of addressing them by name in an email, that it would feel very personalized. So that's sort of fascinating. And then around 40% said that if their employer tailored comms to their role or acknowledged their department, then it would feel very personalized. So I think, these are matching up with the top two results here in terms of what employees would expect their organizations to be personalizing, but there's still a pretty big gap in terms of what's being implemented today.
Yeah, agree. And I think, Heather, when I think about the work that you do at Populo, that we try to do at Gallagher, I think everything is headed towards what can we do to close that gap between a consumer grade experience and the employee experience. And there's still strides that can be made, but one of the things that we keep seeing now with our clients is that year over year, there's more of an investment and a commitment now starting to be made as the paradigm shifts towards a singular focus on the customer experience, and realizing that when you invest in the employee experience and you have and are committed to creating an environment where employees feel engaged, that in turn leads to a better customer experience, which of course in turn then also leads to better results for the organization and a stronger brand overall. And so I think, when I think about when I started in this business, the questions at the interview table was more around what can you do for us? But this has evolved so much now, where organizations now at the table are asking, what can we do for you? How do we set you up so that you can be a meaningful part of our organization's success? And the way that we communicate this and the investment that we make in creating great experiences for employees, I think is so important. I've always felt, Heather, that work should feel great. People should look forward to going to work. It shouldn't be so easy to turn it into a punchline or to parody it in TV shows and in comics. I think there's an emerging leadership and style of thinking about creating a much more employee-centric experience. And I think we're all of us on this call. I think we're on the precipice of some exciting times ahead.
I love that sentiment, Chris. Couldn't agree more. And I think personalization is a key part of building that experience for sure.
It is. And, when we think about emerging technologies, I think some of the insights that we were finding is in line with what we were saying earlier. So, Heather, we were talking about different ways to personalize experience, and in Gallagher State of the Sector, of course, more organizations are looking at hyper-personalization as something that they expect to be really impactful over the next half decade or so. But one thing that I found interesting here, Heather, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is the surprisingly low number of organizations that are defining audience personas. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, to me as a marketer, it's shockingly low, right? Because we would never think about building a campaign without understanding our personas and our audiences. So, and to see the focus then on personalization without having the audience segmentation in place is interesting as well. It is something at Popular that we're really passionate about, helping our customers really understand what their audiences are. I think it's so key, right, to building the right channel strategy in particular, to knowing what to personalize, to having the right content in place to make an impact. So it seems like a really good opportunity here to build these out, to build out your audience profiles, look at defining some employee personas. You have the luxury, right, as an internal function to survey employees on this, to have conversations. It's a lot easier, right, to get your colleague to talk to you about these things. So I think definitely a huge opportunity there that should help with a lot of the other things that we'll talk a little bit about later on in terms of defining your channel strategy and making sure that you're getting the most out of your channel.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And please keep the questions coming. We're going to likely address it afterwards. So we're going to try to pace this so that there's some time to address it. I'm seeing some great comments as well, and sometimes even challenging some of the things that Heather and I might be talking about, which we love. One of the things on this slide too that I thought was interesting is artificial intelligence. I think this has become more in the cultural zeitgeist now with chatbot GPT. And I know even last summer, my teenage son was going for a job at McDonald's, and his first screening interview was with an artificial intelligence online, where he was asked basic questions about what kind of hours can you work, what kind of experience you had. And I think it's exciting. I think it's an exciting development as AI starts to become more and more intuitive and potentially more powerful. And again, this is one of the things that might ease some of the pressures in terms of capacity over time for communications professionals. So that's something that, it's still early days, but I think this is an area for sure that organizations should keep an eye on.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Let's talk about personalization and our recommendations here, Heather, in terms of, what are some of the takeaways on this. And I think to your point about the importance of developing these audience personas, this is really an important way to demonstrate your understanding of the audience, but also to deliver meaningful communications more regularly. Because I think when audiences are faced with communications that don't feel like it's relevant to their situation, these are all the things that will feed into them eventually tuning out certain channels because they're not always convinced it's going to have something that's important to them. Secondly, of course, is segmenting and tailoring your audience to be relevant for each of these audiences. And then the third thing, Heather, is of course measuring the impact of comms in terms of reach, understanding, and again, just going back to that term, I'm probably going to use this several times, Heather, which what you brought up because I love it. Table stakes. I think reach and understanding are really more in that table stake sort of category. But really what we should be gunning for is behavior change, satisfaction around channels among different audiences. And there's going to be an insight a little bit later on in this presentation that we're going to talk a little bit about that. Actually, I'll address one question here, Heather. I don't know if you just saw this from Circle about defining audience personas. Do you want to talk a little bit about what we mean exactly by audience personas?
Absolutely. So, it's going to look a little bit different depending on the makeup of the organization, but you might think about things like, do we have a cohort of knowledge workers who work in the office, right? Or who a percentage who are hybrid, who might need a different channel mix than what they see in the office? Do you have deskless or frontline employees who have a hard time, getting access to a digital device to read things like an email from their corporation? So I think those are some of the characteristics. And then you can also look at things like, tenure within the organization, level of information that might be needed depending on your role, right? And then what might be more relevant for some departments than others, right? So if you're thinking of, updates to products, right? You might think about updating certain teams within your organization, but maybe some of the back office functions don't need that type of information. So it really starts with, understanding what are basic things like what are the channel preferences by different employee groups, what employee groups do you have, what they have access to, and what do they really care about reading from your organization? What information do they want to know? And once you build those profiles, you can use that to to target those different segments with more relevant information, which you should see a huge bump to engagement when you do that, and ultimately outcomes, right? Which is what we're trying to drive.
Perfect. And you got a happy face from Circle, so I think you
Right.
did a very credible job of explaining that. And an important part of this too, which Heather's touched on, is the importance of having a channel strategy and committing the resources towards that. So we'll talk a little bit about how it is that we found in the state of the sector that organizations are evolving their channel strategies. And so we asked the question about how satisfied are you with the current channel mix? And we found that 6% of organizations were very satisfied and 57% said they were satisfied. But Heather, you and I have talked about this before. I sort of view these statistics with a viewpoint similar to Net Promoter Score. So for those of you that, I think most of you will know about Net Promoter Score, but for the few that might not, the way that Net Promoter Score, it looks at a 1 to 10 scale about how likely are you to recommend your organization to others. And 9s and 10s, it's a very discriminating score because 9s and 10s are considered the positives, and anything from 0 to 6 is considered detractors. And then in NPS, they just throw away the 7s and the 8s. These are more considered like the fence sitters. And when I look at this stat, I look at it in the same way, which is I look at 6% are saying they're really satisfied with their channel mix. I actually throw away the 57% that say they're satisfied as more like fence sitters. And where I put a lot of the focus on is the 37% of organizations that are either dissatisfied or very dissatisfied with their channel mix. And I really see a big opportunity here for organizations to look at their channel mix. And I think this should be done regularly.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think there's, clearly a real opportunity here to interrogate the role each channel is playing in your organization. Is it helping you reach a specific audience? Is it for sharing a specific type of content? Again, what are employees' preferences for that channel and the type of content shared there? Do you have gaps in your channel mix that could be hindering your strategy? What's really behind some of those satisfaction scores is worth interrogating, because you're completely right. It'd be great to see greater than 6% very satisfied, because channels are so fundamental to executing on your strategy.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's reflected as well in the fact that basically only a third of organizations have a channel framework or a channel specific calendar. So the next thing we'll look at is, whether or not channels are actually fit for purpose. And Heather, I'd love your thoughts on, how enterprise level organizations are looking at the channel mix, because it looks like from the stats that we've seen, a good quarter of them are still adjusting the channel mix hybrid work?
Absolutely. I think we're really still seeing organizations struggle with channels that haven't evolved to keep up with how with the pace of change in the workplace, which of course has happened rapidly over the last few years. So not surprising to see this still remaining a challenge, especially as hybrid work itself is still being defined. Ways of working are still, coalescing. Every organization, again, is taking a little bit of a different approach to it. So it's important, again, to really keep close to your employees, understand what's effective for them in the hybrid workplace, and use that to adjust accordingly. And I think it's also interesting to see one of the challenges here, of course, is an underinvestment in communications tech. So if you don't have that investment in place to adopt different channels or content strategies that would be more effective to reaching the way that people work now, of course, it's going to be, prohibitive in terms of getting that right channel fit.
Yeah, for sure. And I know, it's not that the technology in a lot of cases is not there already. It's really how do organizations ensure that there's an adoption of new technologies. And I always look at, prior to March 2020, the number of calls that I had with clients on video, I could probably count the number of times on one hand. There's one tech firm that used it regularly, but a lot of firms in traditional industries they were still using polycoms and the landlines, and then almost literally overnight, everything changed. It's really hard to visualize a day where you don't have at least a few spells of back to back Zoom meetings and Zoom calls. QR codes have been embraced over the course of the pandemic, and just different ways to engage and using collaboration tools more than we have before. So not just Zoom, but Microsoft Teams, tools like Slack, Populo, all these different kinds of ways that we can reach our employees, I think has definitely evolved. But one of the things that is always a popular feature of the state of the sector is ranking the channels and what channels are organizations using and which ones are the most effective. So as we look at this next insight, I don't think it surprises anyone at all that email notifications and email communications are the number one used channel. But what's interesting to me, Heather, is if you look at the next column over, we also ask people about the efficacy and effectiveness of these channels. And there's a gap between the usage of email versus how effective survey respondents view this channel. Does that surprise you at all, Heather?
It really doesn't. If anything, I'd be curious to talk to the 6% of organizations that aren't using email announcements and sort of what they feel their key channels are, what employees they're trying to reach. I do think something interesting that came up in the survey as well, that really when we're thinking about the job that channels need to do, reaching employees where they work is sort of a basic expectation, but less than 3 in 4 respondents said that they were able to do that. So I think that could come, sort of this mismatch between what the audience needs and what communicators have at hand to reach that audience could speak to some of the effectiveness scores. I think it's also interesting. We'll talk about measurement and analytics in a bit, but we're still seeing really low numbers really in terms of what communicators are measuring and able to measure. So it's also interesting to think about that in terms of how effectiveness is judged, right? Because if you don't sort of have some of that data at hand, you might not have really the full picture to really make some of those judgment calls. So on the whole, not super surprising, but really interesting results. And clearly there's a lot of opportunity to improve the channel, whether that's through content or technology.
Yeah. And I think it's just so important for organizations to put in the time and resources to really understand where are you at with your channels and what is the opportunity to improve the experience for your employees. I think it's to me, it's obviously it's internal communications 101 is understanding what channels are working for you and what's not, and using those metrics. I think it's a good time to go back to the audience and ask about how you use your channels. And so it's time for the next poll question, and that is, again, this is one where you can choose as many that's relevant to you, but it's a variation of this question. So just to be clear, we're asking, what channels do you wish your organization leveraged even more? And I'd be interested to see how this looks against the backdrop of what organizations are currently using, Heather, as opposed to what channels do we wish organizations are leveraging more. I think it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. And also, of course, Heather and I have given you sort of a tell in terms of what are effective in that previous slide. So based on that, maybe this will actually impact what you might think about what channels you want to use even more than you have in the past. All right, so I think that's probably plenty of time for people to react and respond. Let's take a look at the results here. So this is really interesting, Heather. So for sure, it looks like half of organizations on the call here would like to use mobile apps even more than they do now. Does that surprise you at all?
I think it doesn't, because if we look at the current channel rankings, only about a quarter of organizations are using them as a channel today. So it does seem like, in terms of the potential channels to expand into, a large opportunity there. So not super surprising. The one that does surprise me a bit is the focus on really intranet and chat tools. Just thinking about those as channels that would, again, are sort of ones you might expect to be present. So I wonder if the desire for some of that is maybe changing the technology, or still organizations that are working through digital transformation efforts.
On those results too, I found it interesting that email, there was still 15% that want to use even more email for their communications. But I also found it interesting that at the bottom there with text messages, that 16% are saying that they wish they could use more text messages, when in fact, on the slide, we're talking about this being actually quite effective when we poll people in the state of the sector. And text messages actually have a chance to cut across a large number. So, we work with a client where a lot of their employees are in fleet and logistics. Some of them are on the road a lot. And text messages are actually a really important way to be able to reach people no matter where they are, or and it's an easy way to universally reach a very large number of employees. There's obviously limitations to text messages in terms of the volume of content that can really be shared, but it's interesting to see that as well. One of the comments that's coming across is around video. And one of the things that I think is interesting about video is that it is increasingly something that is looked at as an important channel. So we saw in State of the Sector that half of organizations are using video, and it still has pretty good effectiveness because it is an ability to come across with a different type of medium. This was our bad. We forgot to include it in our audience poll, because it sounds like there's a number of people that would have preferred to use video a little bit more often than they have been. But I think it's a great way to, in a differentiated way, to reach people. All right, so let's talk a little bit now about some of our recommendations, Heather, for channels. So do you want to go through some of the things that we think people should take away from this segment?
Absolutely. So I think there are a few key things to keep in mind when you're looking at increasing channel effectiveness. So one is looking for ways to leverage a consolidated framework. So we think about this in terms of omni-channel publishing, right? The ability to create content in one place and then push it to any channel, which is really key. Thinking about some of those core comms challenges in terms of team resources, being strapped for time, but still needing to make an impact. So this can be, by looking at it through this platform approach, is a really great way to both be super efficient with the creation of comms, right? You're not creating different content for different channels. You're not needing to publish it a bunch of times or look through tools. You can do it all in one place. But then also being able to reach more employees potentially, because it's a lift to push out more new channels is sort of decreased there because the content is already being created. And then I think the second key point is, again, being at that channel strategy. We found, I think it was around 30% have one today. Definitely another opportunity to really understand what each channel is best for, what kinds of content are most appropriate and most effective on your different channels, and using that to inform where you decide to go next. And then also, of course, being looking at things regularly, ideally using some data, whether that's through your tooling or through qualitative methods like, satisfaction surveys for your employee base to understand what your opportunities are to deliver more personalized, relevant, and engaging content, which could be something more on the visual side, as we've seen a lot of interest in video as a medium.
Yeah, for sure. And I just noticed that Kelly McGall shared an interesting point, which is the importance of sending out a communication, but then having links to content on intranet as well, which I think is a great idea, because the intranet for a lot of organizations can be this dizzying jungle of content. And instead of just directing people to go to the intranet to find information, sometimes it's easier to just hold my hand and tell me exactly where on the intranet can I find this info. One of the areas that I think we need to talk about now which is a key theme, is measurement. And I think the area of metrics, this is really, Heather, is the love language of C-suite. If you ever want to make a business case, everything needs to start with measurement. Some of it is by leveraging tools like State of the Sector, so that there's some objective viewpoints in terms of what is the world doing today. And we talked a little bit about this already, Heather, and I don't know if we need to spend too much time on this slide, because when we look at reach and employee understanding, we talk about this as being table stakes. And I find 63%, it sounds like it's encouraging, but still a little bit disappointing that there is over a third of organizations that are not really measuring how successful are they at reaching employees and gauging their understanding of the content that's coming out. Is it just me, or do you find that's a little bit underwhelming?
No, I totally agree with you. I think it is really surprisingly low. The tools that you have to communicate don't let you measure reach. I think, you need new tools, right? That's sort of the most basic way to say, are these things performing for us? Are they doing what they need to do in terms of getting the message out to the intended audience? So totally agree. It's sort of surprising to see when we think about, the more sophisticated metrics that are available today in terms of measuring engagement, looking for ways to connect comms to business outcomes. Really, reach is sort of the first step there. So definitely opportunity there to look at ways to improve the both quantitative and qualitative data collection to really, again, like you said, speak the language of C-suite, build a case for things like more resource and budget.
For sure, Heather. And on the next slide, I think in fairness to those that are not spending as much time, measuring reach or understanding, I think it might just be a function of the fact that so many of our respondents are citing a lack of time and resourcing to be able to do this. Heather, do you have a viewpoint on, the kinds of tools that might be available that organizations should seek out that can actually help with expending less time and resource on these things and having smart metrics and different ways to engineer the employee experience?
Absolutely. I think one of the key challenges that we see folks coming to us with is really having analytics that are, if they have analytics in the first place, they're really spread out across all the different channels, right? You might be measuring your mobile app one way, your email another, might have some level of intranet analytics, right? So what we really recommend is looking for, again, that consolidated approach, which is super helpful when you're talking lack of time and resource and being able to correlate all the data, right? So if you can see how your channels are performing all in one place, it's a lot easier to get to grips with how effective your channels are. And then another recommendation is really to look for, not just sources of data, but sources of insight. So are your tools helping you pull out the common metrics that most communication teams need to report on today? Are you having to go back and do a lot of, manual data calculation or spend a lot of time on it? You should be really looking for tools that help make that a lot easier. So there's definitely opportunity for tooling to help here as well.
Yeah, for sure, Heather. On the next slide, we talk a little bit about ROI, and I think this is an area that, we talk about the love language, and a lot of times your CFO is going to want a dollar return, but I think the reality of the kinds of work that we do is it's not always so easy to think about the return on investment in terms of communication with a dollar return. But I think the return, I think what's more important is to develop a dashboard of specific metrics that are important to an organization, like engagement metrics, turnover metrics, absenteeism, productivity, morale, as a proxy for some of the ways that communications can be effective. The other thing that's interesting here is that 41 or 42% of organizations are saying that it's tailoring the types of content for different audiences and their interactions is what they're using the data for. And this just goes back to that theme of hyper-personalization, segmentation, personas that we've been talking about, Heather, in terms of really crafting a meaningful and relevant experience for employees. On the next slide, Heather, do you want to walk through maybe some of the recommendations for measurement that everyone can take away from this segment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first, point here, and this will vary depending on your organization, of course, but really, what are those KPIs? KPIs that help you track, of course, your channel performance, give you those insights, but then ultimately, what does your organization care about? What things can you roll up into to show really the value of communicating your communication strategy? So that's sort of step one. And then step two, which is something that I, had touched on. Of course, this is something that we do at Populo, that our platform provides is multi-channel analytics. So it's just really a streamlined way to understand how all of your channels are performing in one place. Of course, I'm biased here, but we see it be very effective and something that our users enjoy quite a lot. And then again, using those insights from the data, applying the data, this is key, right? Is pulling out those meaningful insights. Hopefully, again, the tool is surfacing some of those for you as well. Even using things like AI to identify different insights and make that even easier. And then use that to tailor the content for your audience to improve things like the personalization, will really move the needle on engagement and ultimately those business outcomes.
Yeah, I love it, Heather. And just before we go into investment in technology, I like this point that Diane Kennedy made about talking with the marketing team. And I talk about this all the time. I think if you're trying to build a consumer grade experience for your employees, why not talk to the people who are literally in charge of creating a customer grade experience? So I think it's an important partnership. And I think a lot of organizations that we deal with will have these internal silos. And I think it's really important to break some of those. So let's talk a little bit about the technology itself, because that's I think it's something that we've cited already about people not being satisfied with their channel mix. Technology is obviously a big part of this, and so if we look at investment in comms tech, I think it's interesting that almost half of the organizations believe that their organization is not investing enough in communications technology. For those organizations, Heather, do you have any words of advice in terms of how they can socialize the significance and importance of this investment?
Yeah, I think there was a finding from their survey, again, one of those that I found a bit surprising, just given all the themes around lack of budget, lack of resource, lack of the right tools, is that on the top, when asked to rank the top 3 priorities for the year, only 7% said that building a business case for more resources was one of their top priorities. So I think definitely an opportunity there. And I can, maybe some of that was weighted because of course, a lot of the focus will be on what outcomes can we drive, but I think it's really important to look at that that business case, to have a well-crafted business case. And this is something, we of course help customers, prospective customers build as well. But you need to have that case and understand what's the overall organizational strategy that we're helping to drive. What do our leaders care about to justify that investment, right? So I think that's really step one in terms of, again, building the case for that investment.
Yeah, it's interesting. On the next slide, one of the things that I found was really interesting, Heather, was you look at the state of investment in technology, and one of the things that I found was really interesting was that first stat, which is 3% believe that it's too high, that they're rolling out too much. I have my own thoughts on this, but Heather, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what does this mean? When people think that there's too much investment in technology, what does that suggest to you?
Yeah, I think this is fascinating, right? It'd be really interesting to see were there particular titles that were more likely to say it was too high than others. Were there some CFOs on the survey who were, putting their own bias in? But I think another, thing that we see is that sometimes different departments maybe are provisioning their own comms tools. There's sort of a lack of a, organization-wide approach to this, right? So if you're, acquiring different tools in different spots, employee, of course you're going to be increasing noise, right, and complexity, and not having really an efficient model for communicators to contribute to one place that can be, governed and centrally managed through corporate communications, through IC, to make sure it's doing what it needs to do. So I think that could be, potentially why we're seeing some of that there.
Yeah, I've worked with a number of clients that you have all these different divisions all wanting to roll out some type of a communications platform, and in the absence of a strategy, that's usually what happens. Is you'll have a lot of organizations all come in with different vendors that they've worked with and different solutions, and there's not really a focused strategy. And I think it's important to have a plan and a strategy in these things. I want to wrap this up because I really want to try to get to fielding at least a couple of questions here, Heather. What are the recommendations that you think are important for tech investment that our listeners and viewers need to be aware of?
Absolutely. I think maybe, just to hammer this point home that, the key to getting that stakeholder buy-in is to understand your organization's business goals and how you connect into them. And then, of course, any data you can collect around, what your current program looks like to justify the need for investment, but also making sure that when you do get the opportunity to roll out new technology, that you're proving the value of investment, and that's, baked into your strategy, so you can continue to, make your case for more resources in the future. And then, again, going back to the point we were just touching on, looking at, communications technology from a strategic enterprise-wide perspective, building that adoption plan so that, again, employees aren't sort of using a whole mix of tools, communicators aren't needing to do the same, and that you can get the benefit, support, and partnership through a single vendor. So those are some of the recommendations that we'd have for how to improve your technology investment.
Honestly, I think that last point is so important. It's you do all this work to identify what is the best technology, and if you don't have an adoption plan to make it a successful rollout, I mean, this is the worst case scenario where you spend a bunch of money on an amazing platform, and then it's an abandoned amusement park, and it's just there's no worse feeling. So I think it's making sure that the adoption. And that there's a game plan for making sure everybody can seamlessly adopt new tools. So let's wrap this up. I think those are really the areas that I think were the key themes here for Gallagher State of the Sector. This area of personalization, understanding the channel mix, and having a plan for that. Obviously, the love language of C-suite that we've talked about in terms of arming yourself with the right metrics. And thinking about what that tech investment looks like and being purposeful and deliberate about that. So let's finish this off with, first, I want to go back to the audience with one last poll, and then I want to open it up for, I think we've got time for one or two questions as well.
Yeah, thank you to Chris and Heather for that excellent presentation. Before we do get into the audience Q&A, as Chris said, we do have one final poll that is being launched right now. If you'd like to talk to a Populo rep about how any of these topics discussed today can support your comm strategy, please let us know. And you can let us know through that poll. All right, so that brings us to our Q&A. The first one here is, our biggest challenge is reaching a large population who are not regularly at a computer. They use their personal phones but aren't required to download company apps. Do you have any best practices to reach these folks?
Yes, I think from my perspective, Heather,
your audio might have got cut at the end, Kyle, but
yeah, I think we got the we got the gist of it, but I think the idea is reaching large audiences that might not all have this access to the same technologies.
Yeah, I think our answer for this, something we see clients have a lot of success with, particularly in industries like manufacturing, warehouses, distribution, right? These employees that don't have access necessarily to corporate email or even a corporate email address. One of the answers we recommend is digital signage, having a way to put content on screens, whether that's in break rooms, to communicate things like, any corporate communication, but to make sure that those employees feel valued, they get recognized for things like years of service can be really valuable. And you can dual purpose it, right? You can also have those same signs out in areas that are more focused on productivity to display things like key metrics, KPIs. So it's a really great way even to partner with others across your organization, those on the operations side, to sort of build a business case together, because sometimes, it can be hard to, make that, again, that case for investment for all groups. But I think I love that question, and that you're thinking about sort of those underserved audiences.
Yeah, for sure. And we talk a lot at Gallagher about the importance of people managers and their role in effectively communicating messaging, as well as the importance of doing these channel audits, because that might reveal different ways that you can reach these audiences. And it's always useful to have a good understanding. And we saw through the State of the Sector that there's a big opportunity for people to have a better understanding of their channel mix. Kyle, do we have time for one more question?
Yep, we do. And that question is, with personalization and creating personas, what are some tips for how to best prioritize certain personas or work in smart ways if you have an extremely small comms team and little to no budget?
Do you have any tips? Yeah, I can take it. I guess, my thought would be, again, look back at those. What are your organizational priorities and what will move the needle the most? If it's things like reducing attrition for a frontline audience, put your focus there. If it's improving the engagement and building culture for, your hybrid group, look there. So.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we have time for. Our team can follow up with those we didn't get to. And again, I want to thank Chris and Heather for diving into the data and sharing their insights. And thank you all for joining us today. I hope to see you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.